Today we're looking at the Today Show interview with Brian Houston, the founder of the international megachurch Hillsong, and his comments about the Carl Lentz scandal. All right, so about a week ago, Brian Houston, the founder of Hillsong Church International, sat down with Savannah Guthrie for an interview on the Today Show to talk about the Carl Lentz scandal. Now, many of you probably know Carl Lentz, or at least have heard about the popular New York City pastor of Hillsong, New York City. Either because in 2020 he was fired from his post for numerous affairs, or because he is widely known as Justin Bieber's pastor. So when Houston fired Lentz from his post, a domino effect took place afterwards, and other Hillsong pastors also stepped down or were removed from leadership, namely in Dallas and in New Jersey. So in this video, as I show you the interview with Brian Houston, I intend to add some thoughtful consideration to a story that many people will too easily dismiss with platitudes like grace means we don't condemn or truth means he gets what he deserves. The gracers need to know that truth still matters and deserves to be discussed. And the hard truthers need to realize redemption is the ultimate goal here, not exposing frauds. I personally learned some lessons when the scandal first broke after hearing Lentz multiple times wiggle uncomfortably out of professing biblical truths when he was asked about it on national TV. And I thought to myself, well, that's what happens when you compromise biblical truth. But then the Ravi Zacharias scandal broke out, and I was a big fan of Ravi. Ravi was a deep thinker, somebody who upheld biblical truth, but he did some horrible things as well. And it reminded me that we all desperately need Jesus. So I want to be very clear. This has nothing to do with condemning Hillsong or deriding Hillsong. It is simply cultish thinking to think that we cannot critique ourselves. If we don't do that, then we are not thinking clearly. And we're tipping the rest of the world off that we don't think critically about our own faith. So we need to have these conversations. So here's the goal of this short video. We don't want to blindly defend Hillsong, and we don't want to blindly condemn them. We just need to think deeply about what this means for our individual stories. If you love truth and Jesus, then you need to use this video as a tool to help you unpack some of the rich truths that can be mined from thinking about these things. So here's some general takeaways from the interview with Houston on the Today Show.
Lentz founded the East Coast branch of Hillsong in 2010, drawing stars in like Justin Bieber, who Lentz baptized in an NBA player's bathtub. But it all came crashing down last fall when Lentz was fired and admitted to an affair, writing on social media, "I am deeply sorry for breaking the trust of many people." A woman who says she was his mistress speaking soon after.
He keeps saying, I manage celebrities and I travel with them. He didn't want to say what he does.
And more allegations of unusual behavior for a pastor followed.
So I want to stop right there really quick. I think it's very telling what this woman has to say about Carl Lentz. Now, I know the media was so quick to jump on this story because it undermined Christianity more so than jumping on stories of life change or the great work that churches do all over the world. So, but I do believe that there's something interesting in what this woman said. Not only was Carl Lentz trying to hide what he actually did, because obviously he was lying to this woman, but also think it's interesting the lie that he told, that he manages celebrities. In some ways, there may be more truth to that than we realize. And so we'll get into that as we hear a little bit more about what Houston has to say. So let's dig into this interview a little bit further.
They say he would come in a chauffeured car, wait in a green room, come do a sermon and depart. Does that bother you?
It does to a degree, for sure. Look, Carl was Carl. He's a unique character. There's a lot of things I miss about Carl. But having said that, there were leadership issues that I believe included lying, included what I would call narcissistic behavior.
Okay, so the reaction that I first have to this is a couple of things. First of all, Houston claims that Lentz had narcissistic behavior and that there was a lot to admire about Carl, or a lot of things that he liked about Carl, and a lot of things that he's going to miss about Carl. Now, I'm sure that's true. I'm sure Lentz was kind of like a son to Houston and all that stuff. However, the one thing we don't hear here is a biblical rebuke of celebrity pastorship. Now, I kind of already alluded to this to begin with, but I think that we need to be kind of direct about this, that the idea that there is such a thing as a celebrity pastor. Now, I understand that there were times where people wanted to throw themselves in Peter's shadow, and even there were people who were cutting the coat of Paul and they wanted to take those pieces of cloth for its healing property, they believed. And there is this kind of worship that happens when people are used influentially in the lives of others. It's kind of an undeniable thing. I would even go as far, and I know this is kind of religious language, but I would go as far as to say that the anointing is attractive. So people who are charismatic, who have a lot of gifting, they certainly draw people to them. But here's the difference. In the Bible, when people had others throwing themselves at their feet, worshiping them as though they were something special, men of God, women of God were always very quick to say, you don't need to worship me, you need to worship Jesus. They were very, very quick to say, this is not about celebrity personalities. I mean, I think of Paul in 1 Corinthians saying, it is not about you saying that you've been baptized by Paul. It's not about you saying you've been baptized by Peter or anybody else. This thing is really about the gospel of Jesus Christ, what Jesus has done for you. So this is clearly what was not taking place in this church. Now, the big problem is this, is that the dirty little secret of many church planters in Christianity today is that this is the goal for many, to have such a large platform, so many followers on social media so that we can reach more people. Well, the reality is that we need to be careful that when we say reach more people, we don't actually mean make myself more famous. And this is the trap, the slippery slope that Lentz found himself in. And I'm just going to go ahead and just say it really, really clearly. And I think there's going to be people who are not Christians who amen this because they realize this was not the way of Jesus. I don't believe there should be such a thing as a celebrity pastor. Not in our modern day sense. Yes, people are going to be attracted to a real person serving a real God. It's undeniable. But the idea of the modern day celebrity pastor, I got to be totally honest with what I think about this. When I read the Bible, I see people who were killed for their faith and hated by the world. It was Plato who said, prophesied about a truly righteous and good man, that the world couldn't stand him and would kill him eventually. I think about Dostoevsky in his book, The Idiot. It's one of his probably least read, but one of my favorite stories by Dostoevsky, that somebody who was truly good and truly benevolent and truly kind would be ostracized as an idiot. That's the world that we live in. And the reality is our world is antithetical to biblical truth. And we should be a little concerned anytime we find people elevating us, because it could be that we've changed the message in order to try to reach more people. And in the process of doing so, we're not doing anybody any favors.
Should you have known earlier? Should you have done something earlier about the leadership of Hillsong?
I think there's a lot of things I should have known earlier. And hopefully moving forward, we'll make sure we have far better systems in place and better accountability.
Now, I'll say about this answer, I don't think this is dismissive. Throughout this interview, you can see a kind of contriteness in Houston. And for me, it really kind of put flesh on him. And it gave me a sort of sympathy for Houston, because the one thing that we don't want to do is just dig into this story and miss the fact that there's a person behind this story. And so I'm sure Houston is heartbroken, and I know that he's remorseful over what took place and probably a little bit disappointed in himself. And I do think that kind of shines out in this interview, and that's important because Guthrie's asking him some difficult questions, and there seems to be a level of accountability that he's willing to take for some of the things that took place at Hillsong NYC.
You see this pastor with the VIP row piling around celebrities. How come he didn't come down harder and say, not in my church, no way? How does this reflect the message I'm trying to preach?
There's another side to it. I mean, one person who's obviously been well reported is Justin Bieber. If you think back several years now, when he was wrecking hotel rooms and basically on the edge of getting deported to Canada, there was certainly talk about that, and living an out-of-control life with abuse of drugs and so on. And look at Justin Bieber today. Anyone who's been fair could see a radical change. And so not everything about it is bad.
No, I guess the question is whether the celebrities got better treatment, more attention.
Yeah, I do think that we did allow a culture to develop where it was one rule for celebrities and a different rule for other people.
I'll give you the cynical view that as long as Carl was attracting press, bringing more members into Hillsong, that you were okay with that. You knew what was going on, but you were okay with that.
Now, I think this is a great question. And I have to be honest that I kind of wonder about the cynical view myself. Was it expedient? Was it useful for the church to have somebody that was such a lightning rod of attention, at the helm of their church, so much so that they were willing to overlook certain transgressions and certain improprieties and certainly unbiblical things and unbiblical attitudes in order to continue to elevate this platform in NYC. But there does need to be a sense of accountability in the way that we are reaching people. A guy named Marshall McLuhan said this a long time ago. He's a philosopher, and he is a well-renowned person in media theory. And he said, the medium is the message. In other words, what he was saying is that the way that we attract people is going to determine the way in which they interact with the message. So the medium matters. So we can't just toy around with the medium, make it as culturally relevant as possible at the expense of biblical truth, and think that we're not going to reap the repercussions of becoming totally secular with our medium, but then saying, well, we'll try to protect the message as much as possible. Both are important. And that seems to truly be a problem at Hillsong Church NYC and perhaps at other Hillsong churches. And perhaps if we want to even broaden it out, maybe it's a problem in the modern day church. Perhaps there's a dirty little secret that we aren't willing to admit to ourselves, that we want to be as famous as possible. We want to grow our Instagram accounts as much as we possibly can. And really we want to do it for our own sake, not really because it's reaching people. So we have to be careful about that slippery slope.
I have reflected many, many times, and I'm acknowledging that mistakes have been made and that there are things where we need to get far better, much better. I'm not shrinking back from that.
Have you thought about maybe this church is too big, the problems reflect that, then it's time to downsize or take a different approach?
Yeah, I'm not sure a church can be too big. I just think we have to grow into ourselves. And God's on your side.
Churches can come in all kinds of sizes and shapes and flavors, but you see the lights, you see the music, you do see the pretty people. Do you ever think about what Jesus would have felt like sitting in Hillsong Church?
Honest answer?
Yes.
I think he would like it.
That pause, I think, is just essentially a mic drop. It's a great question. What would Jesus think about going to a church like Hillsong? Is the church too big? Is there a systemic problem with the way church is being done at Hillsong that is causing some of these things to be created? I can't think of a better question, and ultimately that is the takeaway from this video. It is a question that churches need to ask themselves. Perhaps the best among them is that first one, I think. Just what would Jesus think about walking through the doors of Hillsong Church? What would he think about the VIP section? What would he think about the presentation of the gospel? What would he think about so many things that are taking place in church? But if pastors are not asking themselves this question, then they are being negligent at the very least. Is that we constantly need to create a church that Jesus would feel comfortable going to. A kind of Christianity that the disciples would approve of, rather than just being so steeped in the culture that we've lost our way. I think it's undeniable that Hillsong, in a sense, has lost its way. And maybe they need to be bold enough to ask the question of, is there a number that is too big? Are we going to continually justify the fact that we're building these huge media empires that maybe we're not even capable of managing? Are we willing to do that as long as it's willing to grow, even at the expense of biblical truth and at the expense of God's desire? Because I'll tell you what I think. I think there is a number that is too big, and it is that number that is bigger than what God intended that church to be. And so you think to yourself, can a church really be bigger than God wants it to be? And I think the answer is yes. I think a church should be as big as it is supposed to be healthy and no more. And I think we need to fight for that. And quite frankly, after this interview, I went and I looked up and saw an article from the New York Post about what Brian Houston is doing in the aftermath of these scandals. And Brian Houston has taken a position of kind of less leadership and allowing others to lead in certain areas so that he can get back to actually discipling the leaders of his church. And as a final thought, I'll just say this. I've met countless people who say that they do not go to church because of excuses like this with this scandal. They'd say, well, I've been hurt in church, or Christians are hypocrites. And I just want to tell you, if you want to go congregate with people that are not hypocrites, then I think, well, I don't know what you're going to do, because you can't even congregate with yourself at that rate. The truth is that there's issues and problems everywhere. And if we're willing to discount Christianity simply because of some of its adherents, then we are not really interested in grappling with the truth. We just want easy answers, and easy answers never create good solutions. So I want to encourage each and every person, whether you're a Christian or not, to think about these issues, but then more importantly, to think about the truth of Jesus. Because if we're going to see some of the wounds and the scars and the warts of church, ultimately it should help us not be so fixated on people and celebrity and personality. Hopefully that's the moral of this story. Hopefully it pushes us closer to Christ and his truth, because that's who we need to be focusing on anyway. You can catch brand new episodes of Indie Thinker with Reed Huberman every Monday, and weekly bonus episodes to keep you thinking throughout the week. But you have to subscribe and click the bell to be notified when new episodes drop. If you enjoy this content, make sure to like this video and share it with friends.